Please, I'm begging you, be quick." The cowboy froze, then did the unthinkable. She lay tied between the fence posts under a burning sun, dust rising with every shallow breath. The cowboy stood over her with a knife in hand, close enough to cut the rope, but he just stared like he recognized something worse than death, and in that terrible stillness, it became clear. Saving her wasn't the choice that froze him. The rope creaked before she did. It stretched under her weight as the wind kicked dust across her face, coating her skin in a dry film that cracked when she tried to breathe. A horse stamped its hoof nearby, stirrups clinking in the heat like distant church bells. The ground beneath her back felt hot enough to scorch through flesh, but she didn't flinch. She had already learned that movement only made the rope bite deeper. The cowboy's boots crunched in the dirt, slow and measured. He didn't speak. He didn't rush. His shadow cut across her chest, blocking the sun for a moment before sliding away again when he moved. His hand hovered near the knife on his belt. That was all. Just hovering. She opened her mouth, a whisper scraping from a throat gone dry. "Be quick." He didn't answer. Instead, his eyes drifted past her wrists, past the rope, scanning the ground like he was reading tracks left in dust, instead of looking at a woman tied to the earth. Something glimmered under his boot, a scrap of cloth half buried, dragged in a line that trailed toward the horizon. A buzzard circled overhead in a lazy spiral, its shadow sliding across her like a cold hand. She swallowed hard. "Why aren't you moving?" He still didn't cut the rope, because before he freed her, he had to understand why someone left her alive. The sun pressed down like a weight. Heat rippled off the fence posts, making the air ripple like water. She shifted against the rope, skin tearing where it rubbed. The cowboy crouched beside her. His shadow crossed her face again, brief as mercy. She glared up at him. "Cut it!" "Now!" He didn't move. His hand hovered near the rope, but never touched it. She strained against the knot. "Don't watch." "Cut!" He dragged 2 fingers along the dirt instead, tracing a line left by something heavy. A second drag line ran beside it. He murmured under his breath, "2 trails. 1 returned. 1 taken." Her voice scraped out. "I don't care." "Cut!" His eyes followed the drag mark until it vanished in heat shimmer. This wasn't random. She tugged harder, rope biting deeper. It was rope. "That's enough." He finally sliced through the first knot. The rope split with a dry crack. Her right arm dropped, muscles trembling. She sucked in a breath through her teeth, but made no sound. She lifted her chin. "I next." He cut the other wrist. Her arms fell slack against her body. She didn't cradle them. She just breathed. A wagon wheel groaned beyond the hill. He stilled. The sound came again, slow, heavy, like someone who wasn't in a hurry to arrive. She flicked her eyes toward the noise. "They're coming." He didn't look up. "They left someone." She squinted through the glare. "Left?" He pointed with his blade toward the drag trail. "Dragged off. Not buried." Wind swept dust over their feet. She spoke again, voice harder. "Last rope. Do it." He moved to her ankles. "When I cut," he said, "you go west." She hissed, "I go where I stand." He paused. His eyes flickered to her face. "Then stand fast." The wagon wheels creaked again, nearer now. Hooves thudded slow, not rushed. Confident. Like the driver believed the sun would do half his work. The cowboy set the blade against the final knot. A voice rose over the heat. "Leave that one." He looked up. The wagon rolled into sight, pulled by 2 mules. A man sat on the seat, relaxed, rifle laid across his knees like it grew there. Behind the wagon, a body-shaped bundle dragged in the dirt, wrapped in torn canvas. The girl stared at it. "Dead?" The cowboy answered without emotion. "Not sure." The driver drew the mules to a halt. Dust swirled around him like a curtain. He nodded at the rope. "2 you cut. 1 still mine." She spat onto the ground. "No rope is yours." The driver rested one hand on the rifle. "That knot buys coin. Cut it. You pay." The cowboy's hand tightened on the blade. The girl met his eyes. "If you freeze again," she said, "I chew it off." The cowboy didn't blink. He cut. The rope snapped. Her leg pulled free, muscles quivering as blood rushed back through numb flesh. The driver didn't raise the rifle. He didn't need to. The threat sat there between them like a third shadow. Dust drifted over the cut rope where it lay in the dirt. No one moved. The wind stopped. Somewhere overhead, the buzzard cried once, sharp, like a warning. The wagon stood still, canvas flapping once in the heat. The mules pawed at the ground, tails swishing lazily like they'd done this many times before. The driver didn't lift the rifle. He didn't need to. His calm said everything. The girl stood slowly, legs shaking beneath her. Blood slid down her ankle where the rope had dug deep. She didn't wipe it. The driver spoke, voice steady. That last knot wasn't yours to cut. The cowboy stayed between them. I cut it anyway. The driver nodded slightly, not insulted, just marking it. Then she's not half-bound. She's full cost. The girl spoke without looking at either of them. I'm not merchandise. The driver's reply came soft. You bled on their rope. That marks you. She stepped once toward him. I bleed where I choose. The cowboy reached out slightly, not to hold her back, but to match her movement. You're weak. She shot him a glance. I'm awake. The driver watched all of it like a man watching cards fall. You two walk away now, he said, and I don't report it. The cowboy asked, report to who? The driver's jaw moved, slow. To who sends paper? She spat. Paper burns. The driver's eyes narrowed just slightly. Paper rewrites. A gust of wind lifted the edge of the canvas behind the wagon. The cloth-wrapped shape underneath it moved again, a faint twitch like a breath caught between life and surrender. The cowboy noticed, he's alive. The driver didn't look back. He was, sun's finishing the rest. The girl's eyes fixed on the dragging shape. He fought. The driver nodded almost respectfully, bit my hand, didn't beg. She spoke quiet. Then he walks free. The driver gave a dry smile. He can't walk. The cowboy stepped forward. Then we carry him. The driver leaned his elbow on the wagon rail. You carry him, you take his rope too. The girl turned to the cowboy. Her voice didn't tremble. Choose now. One life or both. He didn't answer right away. The driver filled the silence. Paper loves heroes. Writes them clean. Writes her dirty. The girl looked only at the horizon. I don't need clean. The cowboy's fingers brushed the handle of his knife again, not in threat but in thought. The driver watched that gesture like a fox watches a trigger. You walk west alone, he said, and I don't follow. You drag that body, and I mark you. She spoke flat. Mark us. The driver tilted his head. Last warning. One goes, one gets buried. The girl looked at the cowboy. Leave him if you want. He held her gaze. I don't leave rope work unfinished. The driver let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Then this turns costly. He lifted the reins. The mules shifted, ready to move. Dust stirred around the dragging shape behind the wagon. The cowboy stepped toward the body. The driver tightened his grip on the reins. Touch him, he said, and you're marked. The girl whispered, then mark us both. The cowboy reached for the canvas. The driver didn't shout. He smiled and pulled the rifle to his shoulder. They stood close enough to taste dust. Heat sagged the air. The wagon's shadow lay like a thin promise across the ground. The driver kept the rifle leveled. He didn't twitch. He waited for a choice. The girl stared at the wrapped shape. Is he dead? Can we help? The driver's voice was calm. Help costs coin. Coin costs papers. The cowboy stepped forward a hair. Take less coin. Take no paper. The driver smiled without joy. County likes lists. Lists make claims. The cowboy shook his head. I won't sign names. I won't hand lives. The driver tapped the rifle barrel with one knuckle. Then you make my day harder. Or expensive. The girl's breath came thin. Why trade people? Why sell breath? The driver shrugged, almost sleepy. Rules are rules. Paper keeps peace. The cowboy answered low. Say paper also makes prisons. It writes wrongs down. The driver's hat brim shaded his eyes. County pays well. It pays quick. The girl's voice was small, fierce. Then take my life. Not my name. The cowboy caught her wrist. Gentle. Don't say that. Stay with me. She pushed his hand away. I'm tired of asking. The driver clicked his tongue. Words don't buy freedom. Signatures do. The cowboy reached into a saddlebag slowly. His fingers came back with 2 coins and a scrap of leather. He held them out, palm up. Take coin, he said. No paper. The driver studied the metal. Coin's easy to spend. It won't calm the county. The cowboy slid back a step. Then take the body. Leave her. The driver's smile thinned. That's not how contracts work. Partial returns confuse ledgers. The girl glared at him. Ledgers don't hold hearts. They only hold ink. The cowboy's hand went to the wrapped shape. He tried to pull the cloth aside, quick, to check for breathing. The driver shoved his boot against the wagon. Smooth. Don't touch. You start trouble. The cowboy froze, hand on cloth. For a long, small breath, he simply held still, like the world had paused. Then he moved anyway. He yanked the corner of the cloth free with a hard motion. The driver's eyes narrowed. Careful. The cowboy revealed a face, mud-streaked, eyes half open, teeth clenched, not dead, not whole. The man inside gasped. He coughed like a box opening. He breathed shallow and wet. The driver's finger tightened on the rifle. I said, leave him. He costs more alive. The cowboy looked at the driver. Then let us carry him. We'll take cost. The driver's mouth curved. Cost goes on paper. You must sign. The cowboy spat into the dust. I won't sign chains. I won't hand names. The driver's voice hardened. Then I call the registrar. He settles claims. The cowboy's eyes darted. Registrar? Here. The driver nodded once. He's near. He rides circuit. He likes tidy things. The girl's voice cut, urgent. How long away? The driver tipped his hat. Hour less than your breath. Maybe less. Wind lifted dust at the edge of the plain. In the shimmer, a dark shape moved, hoofbeats like a slow drum. The cowboy swallowed. Then we move now. The driver laughed, soft and cruel. You run, you look guilty. You walk, you get listed. The cowboy crouched, lifting the injured man. He took the burden despite the weight in his arm. The girl moved to help. They steadied him between them. The driver raised the rifle, finger brushing the trigger. Step with him, he said. Step slow. They began. Each step was an offer and an insult. The wounded man moaned under his breath. They covered 20 paces. A sound rose from the ridge. A bell, thin and deliberate. Not a town bell. Not a signal of worship. A small handbell, ringing once. The driver's hand stilled on the rifle. Dust boiled at the horizon. Shapes rode closer. 2, then 3. One rider's badge flashed like a coin in sun. The driver's jaw tightened. Registrar or sheriff, he muttered. The rider raised a hand slowly, like someone reading pages aloud. A voice called across the plain, clear and official. State registry passing through. Show your papers. The cowboy's shoulders hunched. He kept walking. The girl glanced back. Her question hovered in the air, unsaid. Who will write us down? They carried the man between them as the riders crossed the divide. The bell rang again, soft, and then cut off like a door closing. No one spoke. The wind blew the dust into their faces. The first rider slowed his horse and peered toward them, ledger in hand. He called, polite as a ledger, anyone needing record? The cowboy kept his pace. The ledger's leather creaked. The rider watched with an unreadable face. The girl's breath hitched. A page flipped. The rider's pen hovered. He looked up. His eyes found them. And then he smiled like a man who has names to write. The riders came in slow, hooves kicking dust with each step. They didn't rush, they didn't threaten. They approached like men who believed the law did the killing for them. The lead rider held a small leather book. His pen was tucked neatly into the spine, wrapped with a white cord. Not a gun, not a chain, a pen. The cowboy shifted the wounded man's weight on his shoulder. The girl adjusted her grip, steadying him. Blood dripped from the man's knuckles, leaving a trail. The rider spoke calmly. Carrying a body, or a debt? The girl answered first. He breathes. The rider's pen glinted in the sun. Breathing costs more. Dead ones file cleaner. The cowboy muttered, "We don't file." The rider smiled faintly. "You don't choose filing. Filing chooses you." Behind him, the driver of the wagon watched, amused. He leaned on the rail, waiting to see which way trouble blew. The rider flicked the ledger open. State requests names, one by one. The girl's jaw tightened. No names. The rider didn't look up. Names make records. Records make safety. The cowboy spoke through his teeth. Safety isn't paper. The rider dipped the pen in a small vial of ink attached to the ledger strap. Paper remembers. Breath forgets. The wounded man groaned. His breath hitched like he was trying not to take more than he deserved. The girl whispered to the cowboy, "He's fading." The cowboy answered under his breath, "He lives if we move." The rider heard it. "You move after you sign." "Not before." The girl looked at him. "We walk without paper." The rider finally looked up. His eyes were calm. Walkers without paper blow in wind. They vanish easy. The cowboy stepped forward. "We won't vanish." The rider nodded slowly. "Then stand firm, and state your mark." He lifted the pen like a judge lifts a gavel. The cowboy's hand went to his knife, not to draw it, just to feel it there, a reminder he still had steel. The rider noticed, "Steel writes nothing. It only delays ink." The cowboy spoke, "I won't give a name." The rider turned the ledger toward the girl. Then she gives hers. "Paper needs ink." She shook her head. "I don't speak ink. I speak footsteps." The rider smirked slightly, as if he'd heard that line somewhere before and buried the one who said it. Dust swirled around their legs, rolling like a tide. The rider closed the ledger halfway. "Last call," he said. "Name or mark?" The girl tightened her grip on the wounded man. "He's dying." The rider nodded. "Good time to write." The cowboy met the rider's calm stare. "He is not your ledger." The rider tilted his head. "Everyone breathing belongs somewhere. I just record where." The girl looked past him, toward the open land. "What if we belong nowhere?" The rider's lips curved in a thin smile. "Then I write unknown. And unknowns vanish first." The girl's heartbeat thudded loud in her ears. The cowboy felt the man on his shoulder go limp for a moment. The rider's thumb pressed against the ledger's page. Ink beaded at the tip of the pen. He asked again, voice soft, "Name?" The cowboy stepped forward. The girl's breath held. The rider lifted the pen, waiting. The wounded man coughed blood onto the dust. The rider looked at the stain. "Blood counts too. Sometimes we sign in that." The cowboy's jaw clenched. The pen hovered. Ink dripped. The sun caught the bead of ink, making it shine like a drop of oil. The rider held the pen steady, waiting. His horse shifted beneath him but didn't step, trained to stand still during filings. The cowboy didn't move. The girl watched the ink like it was a fuse. The rider spoke calmly. "Once ink hits page," he said, "things get simple." The cowboy muttered, "Simple for who?" The rider tilted his head. "For the county. For order." The girl's voice cut through the heat. "Order ties rope." The rider gave a slow nod. "Better rope than chaos." "Chaos burns towns." The cowboy shifted the wounded man's weight again. The man's head lolled, breath thin. The rider watched the movement. "You carry him." "That counts as claim." The cowboy's voice hardened. "I claim nothing." The rider flicked the pen slightly. "Then say you don't." "On paper." The girl stepped slightly in front of the cowboy. "Paper owns people. We walk instead." The rider stared at her a long moment. "Walkers without ink," he said, "become dust." She didn't blink. "Dust still moves." A second rider behind the first spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, almost curious. "You'd rather disappear than be written." The girl nodded once. "I'd rather be wind." The lead rider breathed out slow, tired. "Wind doesn't bury bodies. Wind doesn't feed the dying." The cowboy lifted the injured man higher. "I will feed him. I will carry him." The rider's eyes lowered to the cowboy's wounded arm. "With that arm? Until when?" The injured man groaned again, weak and wet. Blood spotted the dust at their feet. The girl looked down. "He's leaving." The rider lifted the ledger slightly. "One mark keeps him living," the cowboy answered. "That mark chains us." The rider didn't deny it. "Chains are how you stay counted." The girl's voice turned to a low rasp. "We don't want counting." The rider gave a quiet laugh. "Everyone counted or dead. No third option." Silence pressed between them. The wind rose and pushed at the pages of the ledger. The pen tip trembled in the sun. The cowboy's hand drifted toward the knife again, not to draw, but to feel the weight. The rider watched that motion with measured interest. "You sign," he said, "or steel speaks for you." The girl stepped forward. "Steel speaks louder." The rider's eyes sharpened. "Steel speaks once. Paper speaks forever." The cowboy looked at the girl. Her breathing was shallow now, exhaustion creeping into her bones, but her eyes held fire. He asked her quietly, "Do we fight?" She answered without hesitation, "I don't kneel." He nodded. "Then we don't sign." The rider exhaled slowly, disappointment rather than anger. "So be it." He lifted the pen higher. Then, instead of writing, he flicked the ink onto the dirt at their feet. A dark blot spread across the dust, soaking in like a wound. The rider looked down at it. "There," he said. "One mark anyway." The cowboy's grip tightened. "You call that a record?" The rider nodded once. "I call that enough." The ink stain glistened in the heat. The girl stared at it, that small blot of black against endless dust. It looked like a grave without a body. She spoke low. "Hush, what now?" The rider closed the ledger slowly. "Now you walk. With stain." The cowboy stared at the blot. "You said no names." The rider nodded. "No names," he said. "Just mark." The wounded man let out a shuddering breath, as if the ink had touched him too. The rider backed his horse a step. "Walk," he said. "But know this. The county hunts ink." The cowboy held the man steady. "Let them hunt." The rider's eyes met his. "They will." The girl looked once at the ink spot, then turned west. The cowboy followed. Behind them, the ink mark dried in the sun. A single rider watched it like a seed just planted. The riders didn't follow. They just watched them walk, ledger closed but held ready, like a weapon waiting to be opened again. The cowboy carried the wounded man with effort, his arm trembling from strain. The girl walked beside him, keeping pace, even as blood dried on her wrists. Behind them, the ink stain on the ground grew smaller with every step. The girl spoke first, her voice low. "They marked us without asking." The cowboy nodded once. "Paper doesn't ask." She glanced at him. "Would you sign if I fell?" He kept walking. "And I carry." "I don't sign." Her voice tightened. "And if carrying fails?" He shifted the weight again, jaw tight. "Then I still don't sign." Wind scraped across the plain, lifting dust like smoke. The riders stayed behind near the mark, horses still waiting like stones. The girl stopped suddenly. The cowboy paused, breath heavy. "What is it?" She pointed to the man slumped on his shoulder. "He'll die on your back." He said nothing. She stepped closer. "Lay him down, shade him." The cowboy looked at the land. No trees, only a rise of rock a little further west. He nodded. "Rock outcrop," he said, "small shade." They moved toward it. Each step dragged. The wounded man groaned, slipping in and out of consciousness. As they reached the rocks, the girl knelt and brushed sand aside with her palm, making a small hollow. "Set him here." The cowboy lowered the man carefully, easing him against the stone. For the first time since they cut the rope, they were not moving. The girl tore a strip from the bottom of her dress with her teeth. "Hold his head." The cowboy did. She pressed the cloth to the bleeding wound on the man's side. The cowboy watched her hands. "You help him." She didn't look up. "I help breath." "Not paper." The wounded man coughed again, blood beading on his lips. His eyes fluttered open for a moment, unfocused. The girl whispered, "Drink." She held the strip of cloth to his lips. He tried and failed, breath catching. She turned to the cowboy. "Water." He hesitated. "Oh, only a little left." She met his eyes, steady. "Water buys breath. Paper buys chains." He handed her the canteen. She tilted it, letting only a few drops touch the man's tongue. He swallowed weakly. The cowboy watched the horizon. They still stand there. She didn't look back. They want us to feel watched. The cowboy scanned the dust. The riders were still near the ink, 3 silhouettes against the sun, unmoving. The girl wrung the blood from the cloth, her hands steady despite the shaking in her body. She said quietly, "They won't chase now." The cowboy nodded. "They wait for night." She dabbed the cloth again. "They wait for hunger, too." The cowboy looked at her wrists. Rope burns raw, skin torn. He asked, "Bandage?" She paused a breath. "For me? Or for walking?" He answered, "For walking." She gave a small nod. He tore a strip from his sleeve and handed it to her. She wrapped her wrists, slow and efficient. "Care without claim," she said. "That's allowed." He answered, "Claim wastes time. Care keeps breath." Silence stretched between them. Not soft, but different now. Earned. The girl lifted her head, eyes narrowing. "See that?" The cowboy followed her gaze. Far off, past the ink stain, one rider had mounted again. He wasn't riding toward them. He was riding in a wide arc, not chasing, circling. The girl's voice dropped. "They're drawing a boundary." The cowboy's grip tightened on the knife. "They want corral without rope." She nodded slowly. "They'll push us west," she said, then close behind. He stood, scanning the line of riders. "They're patient." She rose too. "So are we." The wounded man stirred, whispering something too soft to catch. The girl bent closer. His lips moved again. One word, slurred but clear. "Names." She froze. "He's asking." The cowboy shook his head. "He doesn't need names." The man whispered again, eyes half open. "Don't let them write." The girl laid a hand over his. "They already marked ground. They won't mark you." The man's breathing eased, not strong, but steady. The girl stood. "We move soon." The cowboy nodded. They both looked west, where land lay open like a blank page. Behind them, the riders shifted formation and the slow as ink drying. The riders moved like a clock hand, slow and precise. They didn't ride toward them. They rode around them, a wide arc, careful and patient, marking a shape in the land. The girl watched their path. "They're not chasing. They're closing." The cowboy lifted the wounded man again, setting him across his shoulder with a grunt. "They want us tired." She nodded once. "Tired signs faster." They began walking again, keeping to the line of rocks. Heat pulsed up from the ground, each step kicking dust into the air. The riders in the distance continued their arc, 3 shadows cutting a semicircle across the land. The girl spoke low. "They won't fire yet." The cowboy's voice stayed flat. "Paper first. Lead later." She looked at him. "You know their rhythm." He adjusted his grip. "I've seen filings. Watched men break." She studied his face. "And you? You never signed." He kept walking. "I walked away." She asked, "They let you?" He shook his head. "They forgot me." The wind rose from the west like a dry breath. It tugged at their clothes, trying to push them onward. The girl glanced back. "They herd like cattle." The cowboy nodded. "Without whips. Just ink." The wounded man groaned. His breath rattled, weight shifting awkwardly across the cowboy's shoulder. She said quietly, "Set him down soon, or you fall first." He answered, "I can hold." She stepped ahead slightly. "Don't prove strength. Prove sense." He paused. Just a moment, then handed the man carefully to her. She took the weight, holding the man across her arm. He asked, surprised, "You carry." She looked at him. "I bleed already." "Weight is just weight." He nodded once and walked beside her, ready to catch either of them if needed. Behind them, a rider angled to the right slightly, subtle, but enough to steer their direction. The girl noticed. "See? They guide." He scanned the line, left side open. "West still free." She replied, "West until water. Then trap." The cowboy looked ahead. No trees, no river yet. Just more heat. The girl murmured, "They wait for thirst." The cowboy wiped sweat from his brow. "How long we last?" She spoke simply. "Long enough." The rider on the far left raised a small flag, plain white cloth, tied to a stick. He didn't wave it, he just held it steady. The girl narrowed her eyes. White flag? The cowboy frowned. For surrender? She shook her head. For comply. Not surrender. The cowboy spat dust. Flag means nothing, the girl corrected him. To flag means witness. They want proof we refused. He glanced back. The rider with the flag remained still, hoarse breathing in slow clouds. The cowboy asked, "Why watch so calm?" She responded, "They think ink already won. They watch formality." He clenched his jaw. "Then we ruin formalities," she gave a thin smile. "Ruin is still action. Better than signing." The wounded man stirred. "Water," he whispered. The cowboy reached for the canteen again. He hesitated, then handed it to her. She held it above the man's lips. Only a drop fell. The wounded man swallowed with effort. The cowboy spoke under his breath. "We dry out before them," she replied. "Dry with dignity. Better than wet in chains." A long silence followed, only wind and hoofbeats far behind. The girl's steps began to slow. Blood loss took pace from her stride. The cowboy noticed. "You fade." She gripped the wounded man tighter. "I walk." "Fade later." He stepped closer. "Trade me weight." She hesitated, then nodded once. They shared the burden now, one arm each under the dying man, their steps aligned. Dust rose in twin trails. Behind them, the rider with the flag lowered it slightly, then lifted it again, like a clerk adjusting his posture before writing. The girl saw it. "They prepare pen." The cowboy's eyes hardened. "Let them write on wind." The riders shifted formation again, closer now, still silent, still patient. Her breath came shallow. "They close by sundown," he nodded. "Then we outlast sun." They kept walking. The flag stayed raised. Ink waited. The sun lowered, turning the sky into a copper sheet. Heat no longer burned. It pressed, heavy and relentless. Their shadows stretched long ahead of them, thin shapes walking before the bodies that cast them. The riders behind shifted formation again. No chase, just quiet repositioning, tightening the invisible pen line around them. The girl stumbled once. The wounded man slipped in their grip. The cowboy caught him before he hit the dirt. The girl exhaled hard, set him down, only for breath. They lowered the man beside a flat rock. He lay still, eyes cracked open just enough to reflect light. The cowboy kneeled. Sweat ran down his jaw, stinging his cut arm. "He won't last much longer." The girl's voice was dry. "Neither will we." Behind them, one rider detached from the arc and moved slowly forward, not aggressive, just approaching. He held no rifle, only a small water skin. The cowboy stood. "Stay back." The rider didn't raise a hand. "Water," he said. "Just water." The girl stared. "For cost?" The rider shook his head. "For record." The cowboy's tone sharpened. "No record." The rider pointed at the water skin. "No ink. Only drink." The girl narrowed her eyes. "Why give?" the rider answered plainly. "Thirst breaks faster. Drink slows break." The cowboy stepped between them. "You want us alive." The rider nodded. "Dead men don't sign. They stain only once." The girl's lips cracked when she spoke. "Leave water," she said. "Then ride." The rider tilted his head. "I give by hand, not by drop." The cowboy's grip on the knife tightened. "You get no hand near us." The rider studied his face. "You'll die proud. You'll die written wrong." The girl stepped forward despite the pain. "Written or not," she said, "I walk." "That's record enough." The rider let out a breath that sounded almost like pity. He tossed the water skin in the dust at their feet. The girl watched it land. "That's spoiled." The rider shook his head. "It's clean." "County water." She looked at the cowboy. He looked at her. Neither moved to pick it up. The rider spoke again, quiet. "If you drink, I write cooperative. If you refuse, I write hostile." The cowboy said, "We don't care how you write." The rider's eyes flicked to the ink mark drying in the distance. "Paper cares." The girl stepped forward. So right wind. Right dust. He stared at her a long moment. Now you're marked already. Why bleed more? She bent slowly, never taking her eyes off him, and lifted the water skin. The cowboy watched her hands. You drink? She opened the cap. A single drop fell to the dust. She poured another drop, then another. She emptied the water slowly onto the ground, letting it sink into the soil like a libation. The rider watched without blinking. The last of the water dripped out. The girl dropped the empty skin at his feet. So we drink when we choose, not when asked. The rider's jaw tightened. Choice makes graves. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. So does ink. The rider turned his horse. He didn't speak again. He rode slowly back into formation, leaving the empty water skin beside them like a broken promise. The cowboy looked at the girl. You poured life away. She met his eyes. Life isn't theirs to give. He nodded slowly. You still bleed, she answered. So do you. Wind passed over the plains again, carrying dust like ash. The riders closed the arc another pace. Far behind, the ink stain on the ground had vanished under footprints and sun. Only they remained, walking, marked, unwritten. Dusk crept across the land like smoke. Heat drained from the ground, leaving a thin sheen of cold rising underfoot. The sky shifted from copper to bruised purple, and the first star blinked through like an eye watching from above. The cowboy slowed his steps. Night coming. The girl adjusted her hold on the wounded man. Night won't hide us. He glanced back. The riders were still there, small shapes against the dying light, not closing in, just holding distance like wolves trained to wait for weakness. The girl spoke quietly. They won't sleep. The cowboy nodded once. They don't need to. The wounded man stirred, murmuring. His words slurred. They cut the waiting. She hushed him. They wait for breath to slow, not for fight. They reached a dip in the land, where low rocks offered shallow shelter. Not cover, just a place where wind moved softer. The cowboy lowered the wounded man carefully. His muscles shook from the effort. The girl knelt beside them, her limbs stiff. Blood had dried in dark lines along her wrists, crusted in the cracks of torn skin. The cowboy scanned the horizon. They hold formation. She wiped sweat from her brow. Like scribes, not hunters. He looked at her. You fear scribes more? She met his gaze. Hunger of paper lasts longer. Lead only bites once. He didn't argue. The wind shifted again, colder now. Night settled in layers, bringing the smell of dust and old grass. The girl glanced at the riders again. They keep distance. They want us to talk. The cowboy sat down slowly beside the wounded man. What talk? She answered without looking at him. Talk of surrender. Talk of deals. The cowboy's jaw tightened. We don't deal, she nodded. They know. They wait anyway. Silence stretched between them. The kind of silence that isn't empty, just full of listening. The wounded man's breathing grew shallow. He whispered, barely audible, cold. The girl looked at the cowboy. Your coat. He unbuttoned it without hesitation, laying it gently over the man. You take it. She shook her head. He needs warmth. We have fire. The cowboy looked at the empty land. Fire draws them closer. She ran her fingers along the ground. Warmth draws death slower. The cowboy gathered brush, scraping dry grass and brittle twigs into a small pile. He didn't light it yet. She spoke, voice steady. Fire or dark? He paused. Choose. She looked at the wounded man again. Fire, she said. We burn before we beg. He nodded once. With flint and steel, he struck sparks into the brush. The flame caught, small and contained. Light flickered across their faces, making their eyes glow briefly like embers. The riders didn't move. The girl watched them from the firelight. They see flame. They write us as reckless. The cowboy fed the fire a little more. Better reckless than owned. She watched the flame curl around dry twigs. Flame writes too. He glanced over. How? She held her hands over the fire, letting heat touch the split skin of her wrists. Rope marked first. Fire marks next. He stared at her wrists. "Do you hate rope?" he asked softly. She spoke without blinking. "I hate paper more." The fire crackled. Its light stretched across the ground, reaching toward the wounded man like a careful hand. The cowboy stared into the flame. "Wagon man said paper keeps towns safe." She gave a short, bitter breath of sound, almost a laugh. "Town safe means someone else in chains." "Always." He nodded slowly. "I saw that. I walked away." She looked at him. "Why didn't they follow?" He exhaled. "They forgot me." She studied him. "No one forgets a man who defies papers." His voice lowered. "I wasn't defiant then. I was just tired." She leaned forward slightly. "You didn't sign." He shook his head. "I stepped out of line. They wrote someone else instead." She watched his face in the firelight. "And that someone died." He didn't answer. The wind shifted again. The riders on the horizon had lit a fire of their own, a single torch on a long iron stake, planted upright. A point of light in the darkness, a marker, a boundary. The girl saw it. "They plant torch." "Like post." The cowboy frowned. "They want line marked in night." She nodded. "Torch says, 'Inside this, you're counted.'" He stared at it. "And outside?" She met his eyes. "Outside means gone." The cowboy fed another twig to their flame. "Would you rather vanish?" She didn't look away. "Better gone than written wrong." He nodded, slow. The wounded man stirred again. His eyes flickered open. He whispered something dry and cracked. "Light hurts." The girl adjusted the coat over him. "Sleep," she said. "No more rope." The cowboy glanced toward the rider's fire. "They watch us breathe," she replied quietly. "Then let them watch." He asked her, voice low, "You ever think of paper? Ever think of signing?" She didn't hesitate. "I think of breathing. Paper slows breath." He nodded once. "That enough reason?" She turned her gaze to the stars. "Reason doesn't matter. Only steps matter." The night deepened. Stars spilled across the sky, cold, bright, indifferent. The cowboy leaned back against the rock. "Will you walk even if they shoot?" she whispered. "I walk until ground takes me." He nodded. "Then I carry—" She looked at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "You carry because you choose," she said, "not because law says." He met her gaze. "I carry without claim," she nodded. "Then carry without regret." The fire crackled gently. The flames licked dry wood, rising and falling with each breath of wind. In the distance, the rider's torch flickered, a single point of law burning against a sea of dust and stars. The girl spoke, almost to herself. "We're between two fires." The cowboy followed her eyes, from their little flame to the torch on the ridge. "Yes," he said. "And in between, we are still walking." She leaned back slowly, exhaustion pulling at her shoulders. "In between is where freedom lives," she whispered. "Too far to sign. Too close to forget." The cowboy looked at the fire, then at the rider's light. "We hold ground," he said. She nodded. "Until morning." The wounded man exhaled, softer now, as if held by warmth instead of chains. The cowboy added one last twig. The girl stared at the distant torch, eyes unblinking. The torchlight on the ridge flickered once. Then another light ignited beside it. Another torch, another marker. Not one boundary. Two. Then three. A slow ring of fire began to form around them. Far but closing. She whispered, not in fear, but like reading a sentence written on the land. They brought more ink. The first torch had been a warning. The second, a line. When the third flared to life on the far ridge, it felt like a signature forming around them. Each light burned without flicker, held by steady hands unseen in the dark. The cowboy shifted his stance. "They're marking perimeter." The girl watched the torches one by one, like drawing boxes. Boxes made of flame. The wounded man lay wrapped in the coat, eyes half closed. His breathing rasped like paper tearing slowly down the center. The cowboy knelt beside him. "He fades." The girl's voice was quiet. "He still breathes. We stay while breath stays." Another torch ignited. Fire bloomed on the hilltop like ink spreading on parchment. The cowboy scanned the horizon. 12 riders. Maybe more, she replied without blinking. Riders come easy. Clerks come slower. He looked at her. Clerks? She nodded. They write final. Riders just heard. The cowboy stared at the growing circle of fire. They want us penned, she answered. They call it protected. He gave a dry, humorless breath. Protection kills slower. The wind shifted. Their own small fire crackled, almost embarrassed beside the torches that ringed the dark. The girl spoke again. We hold ground. No running. The cowboy nodded. No kneeling. No signing. She looked at him. Even if they fire. He nodded once. Even then. The wounded man coughed, wet and weak. She leaned down and wiped blood from his lips with her sleeve. You breathe, she whispered. Stay with your breath. He struggled. They... watching. She brushed the hair from his forehead. Let them watch. He whispered again. They want... names. The cowboy answered for him. They won't get them. The wounded man gave a faint, broken laugh. Good. Let them choke on silence. The girl's eyes flickered. Silence is a language. The cowboy looked at her. You speak it well. She glanced at him. So do you. When you don't freeze. He took that without defense. I froze once. Never again. Another torch flared on the hillside. Now there were 5, then 6. The circle grew tighter, not close enough to attack, but close enough to remind. The girl stood slowly, fatigue bending her spine. They wait for sunrise. The cowboy looked at her. Sunrise. She nodded, eyes hollow but steady. Sunrise makes contracts holy. Morning signatures hold. He clenched his jaw. They want us tired. They want us resigned. She looked at the wounded man. Tired isn't surrender. Signing is. The cowboy fed the small fire a final stick of wood. This fire won't last, she replied. Neither will theirs. They burn coin to burn ink. He glanced at her wrists. Let me clean that. She hesitated, a long, silent breath, then held her arms forward. He poured a trickle of water from the canteen onto a scrap of cloth, only a few drops. He dabbed the wounds gently. She watched his movements. You do it careful. He focused on the task. Rope did enough harm. I won't add more. She spoke softly, not looking at him. Care isn't claim. Keep it that way. He paused. It stays that way. She held his gaze. A silent agreement passed between them. No ownership, only shared defiance. Fair torch on the east ridge flickered. Shadows moved near it. 2 silhouettes mounted, slow and deliberate. The girl noticed. Clark comes. The cowboy gripped the knife. Tonight? She nodded once. They like writing by lamplight. He looked at their tiny fire. Our light's too small. She replied. Small fires still burn, even on ledgers. He breathed out. You talk like prophecy. She looked at the torches. I talk like someone who's seen ink kill breath. The cowboy stayed steady. We hold. She nodded. We hold until morning, or until wind takes names. Another figure appeared near the rider with the torch. This one didn't carry a rifle. He carried a small box, dark wood, polished straps bound around it like a coffin for words. The girl's voice dropped low. Box holds seal. Seal holds sentence. The cowboy's fingers curled tight. What kind of seal? She answered, like reciting an old curse. A brass ring, heated in coal, pressed into paper. Burns names permanent. He stared at the box. They brought fire for ink, she nodded. They burn truth onto paper. And call it law. The wounded man stirred faintly, eyes flickering. He whispered, tremor in his voice. They'll press us. The cowboy leaned close. Not while we breathe. The girl held his other hand. Pressing is for those who kneel. We walk instead. The cowboy scanned the torches. They're closing the ring. She replied, a ring looks like circle, but feels like noose. He said nothing. He felt it too. The girl lowered herself to the ground, sitting beside the wounded man. The cowboy sat as well. Their fire crackled, small but stubborn. The clerk with the box remained by the distant torch. He didn't approach. He waited, hands folded on the wooden lid. The girl spoke quietly. "Tomorrow he opens that box and offers seal." The cowboy asked, "And we refuse?" She turned to him. "Then they press seal on us instead." "Not on paper." He stared at the box. "They brand flesh." She shook her head slowly. "Worse." "They brand history." He looked at her. "What's worse than scars?" She met his eyes, silent, heavy. "A record." The fire popped, sending a small spark upward. It drifted, glowing like a tiny star, then vanished. The girl watched it disappear. "See that? That's how paper wants us. Gone without print." The cowboy rested his injured arm, "Then let us vanish loud." She nodded slowly. "Loud is still free." Wind whispered across the plain, stirring ash and dust. Far off, the torches flickered like eyes blinking in slow judgment. The girl lay back against the rock, eyes still open. "Don't sleep yet." The cowboy shook his head. "I won't." She stared at the torches one by one, counting them quietly. One for rope, one for ink, one for breath, one for witness, one for us. He listened. She continued, voice thin but fierce. "They think we are number 5. 5th fire. 5th record." The cowboy looked at her. "Are we?" She turned her face away from the torches. "No, we are the one that doesn't burn right." He watched her settle against the rock. In the darkness, their little fire glowed faintly, weak but alive. The torches in the distance stood tall, clean, ordered, official. Their fire crackled unevenly. Between those flames and this one was a strip of open ground, just wide enough to walk. She whispered, last voice before quiet. "Between fires is still a path." The cowboy watched the torches. And then, one torch moved, not just flickered, moved, lifted from its stake, carried forward. Coming closer, the torch moved like a slow comet through the dark, its light swaying with each measured step. Behind it, the seal box bearer followed, hands steady on the dark wood, as if carrying something sacred and cruel. The cowboy rose to his feet. "They're coming closer." The girl stood too, blood stiff on her wrists. "They bring the seal. They bring the final word." The wounded man stirred, face pale in the firelight. "They... pressing," he whispered. The cowboy adjusted his stance, eyes fixed on the approaching light. "They won't press us." The girl's voice was quiet, controlled. "Press or record. They always do one." The torchlight drew nearer, illuminating the rider's coat, a dark fabric with a small metal badge pinned at the chest. Not sheriff, not soldier. Registrar. The cowboy spoke low. "That's no rider." "That's a clerk." She nodded once. "Clerks bury slower." The registrar stopped a few paces from their little fire. The seal-bearer stepped beside him, setting the dark wooden box on the ground with careful reverence. The registrar's voice was smooth, trained. "Fire is noted. Gathered under open flame. Witnessed." The cowboy didn't move. "We won't sign." The registrar tilted his head. "Not signing yet. First, I offer—" The girl's tone sharpened. "We don't take offers." The registrar opened the small book at his waist. "Refusal logged. Refusal requires seal." The cowboy's grip tightened on the knife. "We don't kneel." The registrar looked at the knife, unimpressed. "Steel breaks, ink endures. Why cling to breaking things?" The girl stepped forward, firelight catching in her eyes. "Why cling to chains," she said, "and call them records?" The registrar gave her a long, measured look. "You speak well," he said. "You'd write clearly." She answered cold. "I won't write my cage." The registrar turned to the wounded man. "Breathing citizen," he said, "unlisted, untaxed, undefined." The cowboy blocked his line of sight. "He's ours to carry." The registrar raised one eyebrow. "Ours? You claim him." The girl cut in immediately. "No claim. No ownership." The registrar's eyes narrowed. "No ownership. Then why carry cost?" The cowboy answered without hesitation. "Cost is choice, not contract." The registrar's mouth tightened just slightly. "Choice without paperwork," he said. "Burns towns." The girl replied, "Paper burns slower, but it burns people too." The registrar crouched slowly near their fire, careful to keep distance like this was a polite conversation rather than a noose closing. "You fear ink," he said. "More than bullets." The girl's voice was like flint. "Bullets end breath. Ink steals it." The registrar took in the wounded man's labored breathing. "He won't last to sunrise," he said. "Seal could save him." The cowboy stepped forward. "No seal." The registrar nodded slowly. "Then breath ends. Record closes." She looked down at the wounded man. "He walks free," she said, "or not at all." The registrar stood, dusting his coat. "Then his breath ends outside record. That's disappear." The cowboy's voice stayed calm. "Better vanished than owned." The registrar studied him. "You speak for two?" The girl answered before he could. "He speaks beside. I speak for me." The registrar looked at her wrists. Rope burns raw, skin red. "You were bound." She lifted her arms. "I cut rope. They didn't free me." The registrar gave a thoughtful nod. "Cut rope." But rope still marked. The girl stepped closer to him, only a pace away. "Marks fade. Ink doesn't." The registrar's eyes sharpened. "Only for those who live. The dead fade faster." The cowboy looked at the torches forming the circle. "Circle tightens." The registrar nodded. "Circle defines. Inside is record. Outside is void." The girl's voice lowered. "We walk void." The registrar looked at the stars above them. "Void doesn't bury. Record buries proper," she answered, voice low. "I'll lay my own body down." "No pen needed." A brief silence. The registrar gave a small signal. The seal-bearer opened the wooden box. Inside, a brass ring seal sat nestled in dark cloth. Beneath it, a small coal dish glowed. Coals carried all this way to heat law. The registrar lifted the seal, holding it lightly between two fingers. The cowboy's muscles tensed. The registrar placed the seal in the coal. "Law heats slow," he said. "Better than flame. Flame scars. Seal remembers." The girl stepped forward, eyes steady. "We remember too." The registrar glanced at her with almost a hint of curiosity. "Memory is private," he said. "Record is public," she answered, unwavering. "Public stories lie." The registrar drew in a slow breath. "Here it is, then. Final offer." He pointed at the wounded man. "Seal his breath into record. He lives under law." The cowboy's voice dropped. "And us?" The registrar turned to them, firelight reflecting in his eyes. "The two of you sign beside him. No rope. No chase. Registered. Contained." The girl spoke like cutting stone. "No." The registrar nodded once, as if expecting it. "Then," he said, "I burn the seal onto ground instead." He lifted the glowing brass ring from the coals. Embers clung to it, falling in small sparks. The registrar looked at their small fire. "When I press in," he said, "record begins." She asked softly, "And if we refuse again?" The registrar looked at her, his face now fully lit by torch and coal. "Then I press twice, once for record, once for punishment." The cowboy stepped between her and the seal. "You won't press." The registrar's gaze didn't falter. "I press at dawn," he said. "That is law." She spoke quietly. "Then we walk before dawn." The registrar lowered the glowing seal toward the ground. The coal's heat shimmered. The wounded man coughed blood again. His breath rattled like paper crumpling. The girl whispered, "He hears the seal. He thinks it's his name." The registrar's hand paused. The seal hovered over the dust, 1 inch from earth. Coal hissed. Dust stirred. The girl stepped once. The cowboy did too. Their fire flickered low. The seal descended. The registrar held the seal above the dust, ember light flickering across his face. The brass glowed red, heat bending the air around it. The coals beneath hissed like something alive. The girl stepped forward, barefoot, bleeding, eyes fixed on that circle of law glowing in the dark. "Don't," she said. The registrar didn't look at her. "Law doesn't wait." The cowboy moved beside her, knife ready, breath steady. No more hesitation in his stance. "You press," he said. "We answer." The registrar's voice stayed calm. "You refuse record. You refuse ledger. Then you accept flame." She took another step. "We accept dust. Not you." The wounded man stirred on the ground, whispering broken words. "No. Seal. No." The registrar stared at the seal like it was sacred. "This ring," he said, "keeps order. This ring remembers." She bared her teeth. "I remember myself." "I don't need seal." The registrar crouched, seal inches above dirt. "Last breath to speak," he said. "Paper listens now." She shouted, not pleading, burning. "I won't be written." The registrar's eyes lifted. "Fire it is." He lowered the seal. The cowboy moved first, stepping hard between seal and earth, boot slamming down onto the glowing brass, pinning it before it could press. The registrar's eyes widened, shock breaking through his calm. The seal sizzled under the cowboy's boot, flesh charred through leather. Smoke rose. He didn't move his foot. The cowboy spoke through clenched teeth. "No seal. Not tonight." The registrar's voice lost composure, just for one breath. "Move," he said. "You'll brand yourself." The cowboy shook his head, keeping weight pressed against the burning seal. "Better me than earth." The girl stepped beside him, back straight, firelight burning in her eyes. "Better flesh than history." The registrar's composure returned like a lid slamming shut. "Pain won't stop record," he said. "It only delays ink." She stepped closer still, voice rising. "We are not ink. We are breath." He met her eyes coldly. "Breath fades. I record what remains." She reached down, hand hovering near the burning seal. "Then record this." Before the cowboy could stop her, she pressed her bare palm against the red-hot brass beside his boot, holding it down with him, searing flesh, burning skin, smoke rising. She didn't cry out. The cowboy's jaw went rigid. He pressed more weight, stopping the registrar from reclaiming it. The registrar stared. "You're branding yourselves." She glared at him through the pain. "No. We're stealing your mark." The registrar took a step forward. "Let go." She pressed harder. "You want mark. Take it from bone." The heat scorched her skin. The smell of burning flesh mixed with dust and coal. But her voice did not break. The registrar looked at the cowboy. "You'll cripple yourself." The cowboy spoke low, eyes locked on the registrar. "We walk even if we crawl." The registrar hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty flickered. The seal glowed even hotter under their combined weight, heat cracking the earth beneath. The registrar clenched his jaw. "You think this frees you?" The girl leaned forward, pushing against the glowing brass. "This burns your contract," she said. "Not mine." The registrar took another step. "You mark yourselves public," he warned. "Everyone will know your defiance." She bared her teeth. "Good. Let them see fire." The cowboy spoke. "Let them see refusal." The registrar looked at the seal, now half buried into the dirt from pressure, stamping not names but ashes. Dust smoldered around it, forming a charred imprint on the land. Not a clean circle, a broken one, jagged, imperfect, defiant. The registrar's voice dropped low. "You ruin the record," the girl whispered back, "and that's the point." The registrar straightened his coat, trying to regain composure. "Step back," he said coldly, "or be branded criminals." The cowboy finally lifted his boot. Smoke curled from the leather, burned through. His foot trembled, but he stood firm. The girl lifted her hand last. Her palm was scorched, flesh raw and blistered. But she didn't look at it. She looked only at the registrar. She held up her burned hand in torchlight like a flag. "This is my seal." The registrar's expression went still. "You think that scar means freedom?" She stepped closer, hand still lifted. "No. This scar means I chose." The registrar looked at the half-buried brass in the earth, steam rising around it. The cowboy pointed his knife at it. "Your seal lives in dirt," he said. "Not on us." The registrar's face hardened. "Then I escalate. Record proceeds without consent." The girl stepped into his shadow. "Record this." "I refuse." He gestured to the seal-bearer. The man snapped the box shut and produced a folded packet, stiff paper bound with twine and a small brass clip. "Custody writ," the registrar said, "applies to the wounded." The cowboy shifted, knife low. "He's not your custody." The registrar didn't blink. "He's unlisted," he said. "Unlisted defaults to state." The girl lifted her burned hand. "State didn't carry him. We did." The registrar angled the writ toward the firelight. "Care implies responsibility," he said. "Responsibility implies record." She laughed once, sharp. "Record implies chains." "We cut those." The registrar flipped the writ open with a practiced motion. A small brass pen slid from the clip like a blade. "Final call," he said. "Mark or be marked?" The cowboy took a step closer. "By who?" The registrar raised 2 fingers. From the dark, 3 riders advanced, lanterns swinging, badges dull in the torch glow. No rifles raised, no shouted orders, just the weight of procedure walking forward. The girl's eyes flashed. Badges without guns. Still a threat. The registrar nodded once. "Guns are noise. Paper is permanent." The nearest rider stopped at the fire's edge. He set his lantern down carefully, like he was placing a candle on an altar. "Ready," he said to the registrar. The registrar extended the pen toward the cowboy. "Sign for custody," he said. "He lives. You walk." The cowboy didn't take it. "I walk without pen." The registrar turned the pen to the girl. "You?" he asked. "Put fire down. Take ink." She met his gaze, unflinching. "I burn before I bow." The registrar sighed, almost weary. "Then the seal returns." He reached for the half-buried ring. The cowboy kicked coals hard. Embers scattered. Hissing, one ember leaped to the registrar's coat hem and caught. The registrar slapped it out fast, face tightening. The riders shifted, annoyed rather than afraid. The girl swept her foot through the coal dish. Heat spilled into the dust, smoke curling. "This is our fire," she said. "Not your stamp." The registrar's voice cooled to iron. "Hostile designation logged. Witnessed by 3. He raised the pen. "Names?" The cowboy stepped in, knife low but steady. "No names," he said. "Only steps." The registrar looked past them to the wounded man. "Then witness this," he said. He snapped his fingers. A rider produced a small black pad, the kind that held oily ink for fingerprints. He opened it like a prayer book. "Thumb," the registrar said. "Press and we're done." The girl moved first. She grabbed the pad, then crushed it in her burned palm. Ink smeared across her skin like tar. She held it up, black and red. "This ink," she said, "belongs to me." The registrar stared at the ruined pad. "You waste evidence." She smiled without warmth. "I burn evidence, not breath." The cowboy seized the moment. He towed the seal free of the dirt and kicked it into the ash. The glowing ring rolled, hissed, and settled in their fire, dulling. A rider stepped forward. "Enough," he said. "Back away." The cowboy raised his empty hand. "No steel," he said. "Just distance." The rider glanced to the registrar. "Orders?" The registrar adjusted his coat, finding the old calm again. "Hold formation," he said. "Dawn decides." He turned back to them. "You won't pass the ring," he said. "Not tonight." The girl stepped until her toes touched the scorched earth where the seal had burned. "I pass where I please." The registrar's eyes flicked to her feet. "You step," he said, "and I record flight." She lifted her chin. "Record walking." Truth deserves small words. Wind stirred. Torches shivered. The lantern flame leaned, guttering for a heartbeat, then righted itself. The registrar gestured. The riders fanned outward again, widening the curve into a near circle. The cowboy said, "You surround breath." The registrar answered, "I preserve order." The wounded man coughed, harder now. He tried to sit and failed. The girl knelt. "Stay," she whispered. "Dawn's just ours." He shook his head faintly. "Dawn takes names." She laid her burned palm on his chest. "Not yours." The registrar watched the gesture with a strange, clinical patience. "Act of care noted," he said. "Offset against obstruction." The cowboy barked a thin laugh. You grade mercy. The registrar closed the writ halfway. Everything balances. The girl rose slowly. Not tonight. The registrar considered her for a long breath. You think you're different, he said. You think refusal makes legend. She didn't blink. I think refusal makes space. He tilted his head. For who? She nodded toward the man on the ground. For breath. The registrar's jaw tightened. Breath without record breeds chaos. The cowboy answered, quiet as flint. Breath births people. Record breeds prisons. A distant mutter rolled over the plain. Not human. Sky. A low rumble. Too long for hoofbeats. Too broad for wagons. The girl turned her face to the dark horizon. Storm, she said. The registrar glanced up. Doubtful, he said. Season's wrong. Lightning stitched a thin white line, far away, then died. The riders shifted uneasily. The wind came again, colder now, and pushed hard enough to make the torches bow. One torch toppled, sparks skittering down the ridge. The registrar's lips flattened. Pick it up, he ordered. A rider moved to relight. The flame caught, smaller than before. The girl watched the sky. Earth opens doors, she said, even for us. The registrar returned his attention. Dawn is the door, he said. So you'll step through ink. The cowboy looked at the ring cooling in their fire, or through ash. The registrar lifted the pen one last time. Final notice, he said. Refusal logs now. Witnessed. He wrote in the air, a gesture without page, like a priest blessing emptiness. The girl breathed hard. You bless dust. The registrar lowered the pen. Prepare him, he said to the riders. At dawn, we take custody. The girl stepped between the riders and the wounded man. You touch him, she said, and I burn you. The nearest rider eyed her hand, raw and blackened. With what? He asked. Your palm. She smiled, fierce. With everything left. The cowboy stood beside her, boot over ash, knife down at his side, not threatening, just there. The registrar studied their posture. Resolve noted, he said. Fatigue stronger, the cowboy replied. Resolve walks farther. The registrar nodded once, almost respectful. We'll see. He turned to leave, then stopped, eyes drifting to the girl's palm. That will scar, he said. Permanent. She lifted it higher. I designed it, she said. Not you. The wind rose again, heavier. Lightning flashed closer, brief, white, then gone. The smell of wet dust crept into the air like a rumor learning to speak. The registrar frowned at the sky. Unscheduled, he murmured. The riders shifted, murmuring to one another. One lantern went thin, then flared weakly back. The girl whispered to the cowboy, Weather's with us. He shook his head. Weather chooses no one, she answered. Then we choose weather. The first cold drop struck her burned palm and hissed. The registrar looked up sharply. Hold torches, he said. Another drop. Then 3. Then a sudden soft roar as the far ridge turned grey, rain sweeping over it like a curtain pulled across a stage. The riders scrambled to shield flame with their hats and hands. The torch line sputtered. The registrar stepped forward, voice rising. Hold formation. Rain reached them. Their little fire hissed, shrank, and fought. The seal in the coals went black with a sigh. The girl laughed once, wild and alive. Ink hates water, she said. So does coal. The registrar stared at the dying ring. Dawn still comes, he said. The cowboy answered, rain striking his face. So does mud. The registrar's jaw set. Rain delays, he said. It doesn't annul. The girl met his eyes through the downpour. It dissolves. He opened his mouth to answer. A bolt cracked the sky, close enough to shake the ground. Every rider flinched. One torch went out completely. Another slipped from a hand and tumbled down the slope, fizzing against wet stone. The registrar recovered fast. Lanterns! He shouted. Lanterns only! 2 lamps flickered to life under hats and coats, small circles of trapped light in the rain. The girl's voice cut through the storm. Still think dawn is yours? The registrar pointed at the wounded man. He won't last, Storm, he said. Sign him living. She stepped closer, rain turning dust to paste underfoot. He lives without your name." The registrar held out the pen again, rain sliding off the brass nib. "Last chance," he said. The cowboy looked at the girl. She looked at him. No hesitation. "No," they said together. The registrar nodded once, like a judge delivering sentence. Then, he said, "We proceed." He raised his hand. Riders moved, slow, deliberate. Lanterns bobbing in the rain, closing the last sliver of open ground. The girl lowered her stance. The cowboy lifted the knife not for threat, for promise. The registrar's pen hovered, catching a lightning flash like a tiny sword, and from the darkness behind them, where no torch burned and no lantern glowed, a new bell rang. Not theirs, not the registrar's. A single, clear chime, close. Then a second. Then silence so sharp it felt like a held breath breaking. As a figure stepped out of the rain behind the registrar, water streaming off a battered hat brim, carrying nothing but an empty rope cut clean at both ends. The bell's echo lingered in the wet air. Rain dripped from every surface, turning the dust to dark mud. The figure stood behind the registrar like a shadow made flesh, silent, soaked, holding a length of rope with both ends sheared clean, fibers frayed like a wound refusing to close. The registrar turned slowly. Lantern light flickered over his face, revealing something new there, not anger, recognition. The figure didn't speak. He only held out the cut rope, a statement, a testimony. No need for ink. The registrar's hand faltered on the pen. The girl stood tall in the rain, scorched palm open at her side, water washing soot and blood but not erasing the mark. She didn't look at the registrar. She looked at the rope. "Record that," she said quietly. The registrar lowered the pen, one by one. The torches around the ridge guttered and died under the rain. Lantern flames shrank to pinpoints, barely alive. The riders didn't advance again. They held their ground, forming a circle no longer of fire, just of uncertain men in wet coats, their badges gone dark. The cowboy stood beside her, knife still in hand, not raised, not needed. The wounded man breathed slow, each inhale steadier than the last as rain cooled his fevered skin. For a long time, no one moved. Then the registrar closed his ledger. He didn't open it to write. He simply tucked the pen away. "Unrecorded," he said. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't mercy. It was acknowledgement that some things walked beyond paper and could not be held by brass or ledger. The girl didn't thank him. She didn't bow. She just turned and began walking west again. The cowboy lifted the wounded man, bearing the weight without comment. The third figure, the silent rope-bearer, fell into pace without a word, like someone who understood freedom was not an announcement. It was a direction. No one chased. The riders didn't lower weapons or cheer victory. They just watched as three figures walked into the rain, away from ink and torches, toward land that held no record of them. Mud swallowed their footprints almost as soon as they fell. Perfect. The girl didn't look back. The cowboy didn't pause. The wounded man breathed, and the rope-bearer let water soak the last fibers of cut rope, letting it trail in the mud like a snake with no master. In the end, nothing remained for the county to write. Only ashes, rain, and a warped seal buried in cold coals. No clean ledger, no clean ending. Just footsteps, soft and steady, disappearing into open land. If this trail held your breath, if you felt the rope bite, the fire burn, and the rain wash the ink away, then don't stray too far from this campfire. There are more roads ahead, more chains waiting to snap, more stories that ride between law and dust. Stay close. Listen for the bell. Subscribe. And when the next tale rises on the horizon, you'll be there to walk it before any paper can claim it.